So a very warm welcome from the Global Development Network to the public session of the 2020 Outstanding Research on Development Awards. My name is Francesco Bino. I head the programs of the Global Development Network, and I will be chairing this session for the next hour and 40 minutes. Today we have two sets of opening remarks. We're honored to have Dr. Akio Takara, Director of JICA Ogata Research Institute for Peace and Development with us. But first, I would like to pass the floor to Pierre Jacquet, the President of GDN, for his welcome remarks. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this 2020 edition of the Outstanding Research on Development Awards. We call it ORD competition, which is part of the oldest GDN program, a series of awards funded by the Japanese government. And I would like to thank the Japanese government very much for this effort to promote research in developing countries, which is at the core of the mission of GDN. So thank you, Dr. Akio Takara, in guise of your representing the government of Japan, but also as the executive director of the JICA Ogata Research Institute. JICA is a Japanese international cooperation agency which administers the Japanese foreign aid program. And JICA Ogata Research Institute has been really a partner of choice of GDN for all these years. So thank you very much for that. I would also like to thank Elena Nkole of the World Bank, because this program is administered through a trust fund held by the government of Japan with the World Bank. And of course, I would like to thank the members of the jury, Professor Jane Mariara, Dr. Akio Takara, and Professor Habibul Konker. And finally, I would like to congratulate all the three finalists for being shortlisted. So Chukwuemeka Onimadu, Pahan Prasad, and Koksin Woon. Warm congratulations to all of you. Let me say a few words about GDN and about the awards. GDN is an international institution headquartered in New Delhi, in India, and our mission is to strengthen research capacity in developing countries in order to provide insights for the elaboration of public policies in these countries. And we do believe that it is important to mobilize local research to do so. We give a lot of importance to the quality of the research, but also to the quality of the process of research capacity building. And it's very important for us as well to keep an open, competitive process to identify talent and to provide opportunities to those who deserve it. These Global Development Awards are a central part of that strategy. They have been running almost every year since 2000. And as I said earlier, they were launched by GDN with a generous support from the Ministry of Finance of the Government of Japan under the Policy and Human Resource Development Fund, PHRD, a trust fund managed by the World Bank. And I would like to again recognize the very supporting role played by JICA Ogata Research Institute in doing so. We have distributed roughly $3.8 million in research and project grants since the inception of the program. Nearly 8,800 researchers and development practitioners from developing countries and transition countries did participate. GDN awarded 99 grants through this competition since the year 2000. And in that program, there are two distinct components, and that's quite interesting. The combination of the two is quite unique. One is research funding for outstanding young scholars. And this is what this program today is about, the Outstanding Research on Development Awards, which provided 48 grants, 48 grants for a total of 163 researchers. And the second component is funding for innovating development projects. With two stages. One is an award for the most innovative development project, MIDP. And again, we had 43 grants that were given to 43 development organizations. And this can be scaled up through a bigger grant of $200,000 called the Japanese Social Development Fund Award for the most promising projects within that category of most innovative development project. And so far, 8 such grants have been distributed to 8 organizations. This is organized through a very rigorous multi-step selection process, and Francesco will explain later on how this ORD selection process has been organized. And of course, in case of the most innovative development project, this involves site visits, and travel bans did not allow to do that for us in 2020. We will catch up in 2021, and this is why this session today is only recognizing the most promising development projects through this ORD category, which plays a very crucial role in providing seed money to initiate pieces of research that might not have happened otherwise. And some of them may then be scaled up because researchers have the possibility to leverage the awards to get access to later funding. Beyond research funds, however, these awards provide unique opportunities for scientific mentoring by world-class scholars, global networking with peers, increasing visibility, and we are very lucky to have an ORD alumnus with us today, Dr. Marianne Petreschi, who will tell us more about this. And thank you, Marianne, for being with us today. Let me mention a couple of examples, and you can go to the case studies that were published on GDN's website to illustrate them. And one of them was called the RECART research program, proposed by 2 awardees, which analyzes the reasons why less than half of migrants' remittances are used to finance investment in their rural hometowns in the Philippines. And the 2 researchers found that the main culprit is local financial illiteracy. Their initial research work was financed through the ORD award and was then scaled up through additional funding that the researchers could harness. The award boosted their research and their career, and this provides a good example of the kind of opportunities that are unleashed by this award. We are very proud this year to have been able to run the ORD 2020 entirely online. Of course, we didn't have much choice given the current restrictions, but it was still important to be able to organize it. And I would like again to thank all the stakeholders, all those who participated to make that happen. We are sorry that the award ceremony, which is an important high visibility event at our global conferences, could not happen in person this year. This is indeed where the visibility and the networking start, and there is also the important festive elements when the jury hands out physically the award. So we will miss that, but we'll miss the glamour. But the good news is that this is postponed to the earliest date we can do that in 2021. and we look forward to seeing all the finalists there. And that will also be an occasion to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the awards, which falls in 2020. And again, we have to postpone the celebration. So I'm happy to welcome again all of you. I wish you a very, wish all of us a very interesting session. And I pass the floor back to Francesco to introduce Dr. Akio Takara. Thank you.
Many thanks, Pierre. As you mentioned, I'd like now to pass the floor to Dr. Akio Takara, Director of the JICA Ogata Research Institute for Peace and Development. Let me join Pierre in thanking Dr. Takara not only for joining the jury of the 2020 edition of the ORD Awards, but also for Japan's contribution to this important and unique global competition. We're very proud to count among our programs, and in fact the oldest program we have running. Dr. Takara, I'd like to invite you to deliver your opening remarks.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Good evening to all of you from Tokyo, and bonjour wherever you are. I feel so honored and excited to participate in this competition and to share a word with you at the outset. Now, first of all, of course, I'd like to extend our sincere appreciation to the organizers of GDN 2020 Global Development Awards, especially Dr. Pierre Jacquet and his team. Well, what a year we've had. Yes, the difficulty in containing the new coronavirus has made things difficult on a global scale. But I am very pleased that we have overcome the difficulties and that this competition is taking place the same as every year, or almost the same as every year. GDN always leads the trend of the times. The theme of the conference this year is unpacking the health, environment, economic well-being nexus, which clearly is the key issue in the COVID-19 era. On April the 1st, 2020, that's 8 months ago, the JICA Research Institute was renamed the JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development in order to take up Madame Ogata's legacy on peace and development. Madame Ogata Sadako, who served as United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for 10 years, and then JICA President for 9 years, unfortunately passed away last year. She emphasized the field-oriented approach in which projects were carried out on the basis of the needs of local people and local context. And she focused her efforts on promoting human security, through which individuals can fully realize their potential in a robust human-centered society through the prevention and mitigation of risks. Needless to say, the world is currently facing an unprecedented crisis and possibly will experience a momentous turn of events. Now, from the human security perspective, health is most important. I'd like to say that the topic this year is worth discussing not only with leading figures, but also with young researchers. And therefore, this competition is a really good opportunity for all of us. With 20 years of continuous implementation, the Japanese award competition for outstanding research on development is a proven success initiative to promote developing country experience in implementing high quality research, I would say. Many of the award winners in the past made significant achievement and contribution to GDN's mission using prize money and GDN's mentorship effectively. I am very proud of these achievements. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance, the Government of Japan, I would like to thank all the applicants, especially the finalists of the award. I would also like to thank the distinguished members of the selection committee for your commitment and dedication. Now, I think it's time to move on to the competition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Takara. Just before we do that, before we move in fact to the competition, as Pierre mentioned earlier, we're lucky to have one of our 112 ORD alumni with us today. So Dr. Marian Petrescu today is a professor of economics at the School of Business, Economics and Management at the University American College in Skopje, the capital of the Republic of North Macedonia. He is also the co-founder of Finance Think, Economic Research and Policy Institute, a prominent and influential economic think tank based in Skopje. His research focuses on issues related to development, labour markets, and evaluation of economic policies, with a strong focus on transition economies. He published widely in international peer-reviewed journals, international edited volumes, and he published also five books himself. Dr. Petrsky agreed to share with us some insights into his own experience as a past winner of the ORD. So welcome again, Marian. I'd like to ask you a few questions so that we can go a little bit into your own experience and your own perception of how the ORD impacted your own trajectory. You and two of your fellow colleagues, so Dr. Nikita Mojeja-Blajewski and Dr. Blajica Petrsky, applied to the ORD in 2012 and won it in 2013 at the Global Development Conference in Manila. The research proposal that earned you the ORD was about closing the gender gap in wages in your country. This is obviously an important topic, one for which it is fair to expect plenty of research funding to be available in 2012, both domestically and internationally. Now, I'd like to ask you, what made you apply for this specific award? And why do you think, as you said in another occasion, that the award came at the right time, both for your country and for you as a research team?
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much for this invitation to share a couple of thoughts today, and as well encourage people who are researchers who are today competing for this prestigious award. Specifically talking about your question, I would answer in two ways: at the personal level and at the level of my country, North Macedonia. At the personal level, I became interested in the topic, first of all, because of the methodological issues surrounding it, which was requiring a methodological rigor to approach to the issue in a rigorous manner. So in particular, since here in the Balkans, we are facing a flagrant labor market inactivity of women, the key question related to the gender pay gap was actually what would have happened if these women worked. In other words, in statistical terms, if they were featuring into the wage distribution. And this is where it all started from for me personally. You know, the research impulse is the key to drive particular outcome. And in this case, that was the initial impulse to submit the application for the award and its subsequent winning. Why was this important for North Macedonia? Well, partially I already said this is because the country was facing a very large female inactivity on the labor market. The other reason is apparently the large gender pay gap, which at that time, which is like 8 years ago, and if we take the data availability, it is already a decade ago, was 12% in its unadjusted or raw form. By now, the latest figure being for 2019, the raw gap almost vanished, or at least it is very low and statistically insignificant. I'm not claiming that our research achieved that alone. There were, of course, other policies which helped in achieving that results. But of course, this is how the research started, how the awareness in the society was raised as regards to the topic, and this is where we are now.
Excellent. And also, like, your research work brought you to work for institutions also globally, such as the World Bank, different agencies within the UN system, and at home, the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of North Macedonia and the Central Bank as well. This is also not the only research award you received, including International Research Award, or even the first one, in fact. So I'd like to ask you, how was the ORD different? And what difference did winning the ORD make in your personal trajectory and in your professional practice?
True. The award was somehow different, I would say, in the sense that it directed us to think not only in terms of research, although I said the initial impulse was the research side of the motivation, but also in terms of the applicability of the results. What does it mean if we, for example, say that the gap itself is less of a problem when compared to a large contingent of women who do not work, who do not want to work? What could the government do and what it cannot do, and so on and so on. So such thinking made me and my team think a bit outside of the standard research-minded box, and this brought a lot of fruits sometime later. So not only I continued researching the phenomenon in scientific merit, but I also embarked on a lot of applied work since I got the award. For example, I just completed a consultancy service for UN Women Georgia, who hired me to calculate and produce to calculate the gender pay gap and produce policy recommendations for this respective area for two countries, Georgia and Armenia. So currently, I'm also hired by UN Women in the Palestinian territories to do some research and policy work in related areas of female inactivity and informality, and so on and so on. So I just want to, with these examples, I want to point out that indeed this award was genuine in the sense that it starts from research, which is also my basis as a researcher and a professor, but it expands a truly new field in terms of its applicability and usefulness for policy.
Thank you. And you're obviously now a professor of economics and a research vice rector at the University American College in Skopje, and co-founded now prominent economics think tanks in North Macedonia. Now, looking forward, what would you, looking backwards and forward, what would you say to our finalists today and to anyone who is thinking of competing for the award next year? How can a research make the most of the visibility, of the exposure and of networking that comes with a global research award such as this one?
First of all, I would say believe in yourself, believe in your ideas, in your research ideas, and in their applicability, in their, let's say, transferring into policy actions. Things we know or things we could easily imagine cannot place you on the top globally in terms of such a award. So be imaginative and propulsive in making good ideas, as well as in finding out how to make the ideas reality. In such endeavor, maintain the methodological rigor, which is not always easy, I have to say, because you're ultimately researchers, but always think for how the work could be converted into a policy action. Developing countries, or in general southern researchers, where all of us do belong, need every bit of brain, and you should be there to supply it, while the global development network to support you in such striving.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think this is
Thank you.
Very interesting, and I hope encouraging for our finalists. Today. I'd like now to move to the core of the session, which is the presentation by this year's finalists of the research proposal. Before we do that, I have the pleasure to introducing the jury of this year's Outstanding Research on Development Award competition. I would like to welcome in alphabetical order Professor Jane Mariara, Professor of Economics at the University of Nairobi and Executive Director of the Partnership for Economic Policy, PEP. Professor Abibul Konker from the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Zayed University in Abu Dhabi, and also a board member of GDN, and of course Dr. Akio Takara, Director of the JICA Ogata Research Institute. So welcome and thanks again. As you all know, this event is the final moment of the awards competition of this year. And this year, in the wake of the global pandemic and the ensuing social, political, and economic crisis, we issued a call for original research that would look into the policy efforts that address the links between health, environment, and economic well-being, with a critical eye to illuminating both successes and failures. We received 78 applications from 30 different low and middle income countries, As customary for the competition, we set up 2 global panels of reviewers who shortlisted 58 eligible applications into steps, bringing the pool of competitors first down to 18 proposals, and then through a review by a second panel of senior academics down to the 3 finalists. All reviews were blind and triple, and in between, the researchers had the chance to integrate the feedback received from the reviewers into their proposals. Today, the jury will decide on assigning a total of $45,000 US dollars in research funding, 30,000 for the first prize, 10,000 for the second prize, and 5,000 for the third prize. These awards will be in research grants, and like all research grants at GDN, they will be supported through world-class mentoring, technical assistance, and of course, plenty of opportunities for networking. Of course, the jury can also decide not to assign a prize today or to ask finalists to share one of the prizes. So I'd like to thank again our jury members for accepting our invitation and taking the time to join us today. The rest of the session will be organized as follows. Each finalist will present the proposal for 15 minutes, no longer, and we will have 10 minutes for Q&A for each of the finalists. We will, of course, give the jury priority for asking questions to the finalists, which they do live, but we will also try to ask as many questions as possible from the audience. So I'd like to invite you to use the chat box to place your questions as soon as we start the presentations. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to allow live questions from the audience. In the chat box, we will also be posting the posters the finalists prepared on the research projects to give you an overview of each one of them. Finally, if you need any support at any time, please write us on the chat, selecting panelists, or send us a quick email at awards@gdn.int. So I think now, without due delay, we're ready to start the presentations. Our first finalist is Chukwuemeka Onimadu. Emeka is a research fellow in the Department of Economic Development and Social Studies at the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, NILDS, in Nigeria, with a doctorate degree in economics and a specialization in development economics. The title of this project is Impact of Climate Change Adaptation Strategy on Livelihood and Multidimensional Poverty Among Women Farmers in Nigeria. Emeka, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. You're muted.
Okay, thank you, Francesco, for the opportunity to present my research proposal. I'm quite impressed on how you pronounce my name, but for short, you can refer to me as Emeka. So basically, the research proposal is in respect to the impact of climate change adaptation strategies on livelihood and multidimensional poverty among women farmers in Nigeria. So what we intend to do is present an outline, and this is the format for outline. We have an introduction, a research problem, research questions, the methodology proposed, data sources, and expected contributions and policy implications of our proposal. Okay, so the literature is very, very distinct with respect to the adverse effects of climate change impact on developing economies. But what is quite interesting is how these developing economies react to these adverse shocks in climate change. And one of the key factors in how countries can adapt to climate change is the adaptation strategies. And the essence of adaptation strategies is in relation to the fact that adaptation strategies are a very key factor in determining the future outcomes in respect to all the sectors that have suffered from a climate change shock. Interestingly, one of the sectors in the Nigerian instance is the agricultural sector, which is highly vulnerable to these climate change shocks. The vulnerability in the agricultural sector arises from the fact that Nigeria's agricultural sector is largely dependent on rainfall and is highly susceptible to the incidence of increase in temperature and also cases of drought. We also found in the literature that women and children are highly disproportionately affected by these climate shocks. So why women? The essence of focusing on women is due to some stylized facts about women. One is that women are more vulnerable to the incidence of poverty relative to men. Another stylized fact is that about 70% of the poor in Nigeria are made up of women. So in that instance, any climate change shock will affect more women than men. We also found out that women experience wage discrimination, and that more than half of the people in the labor force in the agricultural sector are made up of women. So women actually take up a very important spectrum in the agricultural sector in Nigeria, which is susceptible to climate change shock. So due to the fact that the agricultural sector is susceptible to climate change shocks, the Nigerian government's response was to create an adaptation strategy and an action of plan with respect to climate change. And one of the important operations of the conceptualized plan is that we will have adaptation strategies in that plan. And these adaptation strategies are mainly with respect to maybe crop diversification, having drought-tolerant crops, so that it can mitigate and, in fact, in the future, allow farmers to adapt to the incidence of climate change shock. And the general expectation from this plan is that if implemented and effective, it will reduce the vulnerabilities that exist already in the agricultural sector and then prepare the sector for future challenges. So what is the general research problem with respect to what we want to study? The issue here is with respect to the current design of the adaptation plan. And we realize that the current design of the adaptation plan may leave women poorer and even more vulnerable to this climate change shocks. And this arises from the fact that women play a very dominant role in the agricultural sector. So this is the broad research problem that the proposal intends to look at. And what is going to be our research approach? Our research approach is conceptualized from first an academic perspective, where we did some preliminary literature review, and then we realized that there are existing. We've tried to identify existing limitations in the literature with respect to the adaptation poverty nexus. And one of these limitations is in the scope of existing studies. We realized that a majority of the studies already done with respect to this field focused on a different kind of identifying poverty. So most of these studies used income poverty and not really understanding or focusing on the different dimensions to poverty. Some of these studies also are not gender sensitive, so they rather look at households without looking at the demographics, which already are highlighted in our earlier slides that women play a dominant role. Another research approach to this study is to understand what actually works with respect to adaptation strategies. You know, from the literature, we found that a lot of the adaptation strategies that have been evaluated are either localized or restricted to specific regions. And this is very important in the sense that climate change shocks, the effects of climate change shocks in Nigeria are not distributed evenly, because Nigeria has different geographical zones, and the way climate change shocks happen in maybe, for example, the northern part of Nigeria, the effects are totally different from those in the southern part of Nigeria. For example, in the northern part of Nigeria, you have incidences of drought, whereas in the southern part of Nigeria, you have incidents of high rainfall or unpredictable rainfall. So the question is, what really works with respect to adaptation strategy in the whole conceptualization of Nigeria, and not necessarily just localized aspects? And this is important because it now feeds in as an input to the next adaptation plan, because the existing adaptation plan is expected to last for about 10 to 12 years, and that adaptation plan is coming to an end. So the question is, how do we evaluate what already exists and use what we find from what already exists to feed into the new adaptation plan that is going to be done in the nearest future? So the idea here is to evaluate the adaptation plan that exists in the sense that it provides evidence-based policy recommendations and also to prepare for future challenges. What is our research question? The research question is basic. We want to find out if there's any evidence to show that the implementation of specific climate change adaptation strategies has had any impact on reducing the vulnerabilities. It is very, very specific in the adaptation plan. that this expectation is supposed to be met. That the idea of the adaptation plan is to reduce existing vulnerabilities. And one of that existing vulnerability is poverty. So the variables of interest in this study are going to be of two forms. So we're going to have the adaptation strategies, which is what we've listed here: crop diversification, the use of different crop varieties, the possibility of agricultural extension, and improved adaptive capacity. And the vulnerabilities we're going to look at is multidimensional poverty and unfavorable changes in livelihood. What methodology are we going to use to answer this question? Remember, as I said earlier, the focus is to evaluate the existing plan and understand what works and why it works as an adaptation strategy with respect to limiting the incidence of multidimensional poverty. Our methodology is going to follow this same format. It's going to be in two dimensions. We'll first have to measure multidimensional poverty. And after measuring multidimensional poverty, we're going to link this measure of multidimensional poverty to different variables. Some of these variables are going to capture household characteristics, and some of them are also going to capture the implementation of adaptation strategies. So first, we have to define the terms. Defining the terms is in respect to identifying what really fits women farmers when we describe multidimensional poverty. We then use that to calculate deprivation scores for women farmers, and then feed that into this model, which is going to be a latent, dependent variable is going to be a latent variable, and then use a panel regression model to estimate causal relationships. Now, in measuring different dimensions of poverty, and one of the key or important innovation in this study, with respect to what is already done in the literature, is we are not going to restrict poverty to just income poverty. We're going to be looking at poverty from different dimensions. There's going to be a health dimension, there's going to be an education dimension, and there's going to be a livelihood dimension. The good thing about this is that we're abstracting from existing literature. But what we are going to do with these dimensions is that, even though the literature already explicitly states what these dimensions are going to be, we're going to adapt these dimensions to women farmers. For example, what exists in the literature with respect to education says that, or for example, let's take health. Access to health facility. In the literature, it says, do you have a child who has died? That is infant mortality. Rather than using infant mortality, because in Nigeria, infant mortality is already high, we might not really capture any idiosyncrasies about the Nigerian sector. We're rather going to adapt this to, do you have access to a health facility? So those are some of the innovations we're going to do in this study. Now, our data sources. Uniquely, we're going to be using the General Housing Survey of Nigeria, and the essence of choosing this data is the fact that this data is very comprehensive, and it has been done over different waves. So we have data that exists from as far back as 2010 and as recent as, I think, 2019. Now, the good thing about this data is that it's disaggregated at individual and household level. And more importantly, for our two important variables, it gives us, the disaggregated data also highlights the gender demographic or the gender perspectives to the data. So it identifies who is a woman in a household, who is a woman farmer, who is the woman-headed household, who is a woman who makes decisions in the household, which are very important factors for determining poverty. And also important also in the data is that the data gives us an opportunity to actually answer questions with respect to adaptation strategy. So in the data that exists, there are actual questions where household responded to the practice of this adaptation strategy. So the good thing about this data is that it is very comprehensive and very disaggregated. So it gives us the opportunity to dabble, because multidimensional poverty has different facets. So it gives us the opportunity of looking at different aspects of multidimensional poverty. What will be our expected contribution and policy implication? As I earlier said, we have highlighted some limitations in the literature. So from an academic standpoint, we want to expand this literature. In the literature, there are limitations with respect to the scope of studies done with respect to the adaptation poverty nexus. One of them, which is very, very important, is looking at poverty from a different dimension. And the idea of looking at poverty for a different dimension is so that we can actually look at the causal relationship between adaptation strategies and poverty due to the dimensions of poverty. Another important limitation in the studies, which is going to feed into this, is the fact that most of the studies already done with respect to adaptation and poverty are localized. They do not capture the idiosyncrasies that arises from demographics, do not capture the idiosyncrasies that arises from the distribution of households, and do not capture the idiosyncrasies that come up, for example, for important factors like religion, like livelihood. So due to these limitations, from an academic standpoint, we intend to expand the literature that focuses on the adaptation poverty nexus. Another important factor with respect to the expected contribution is the fact that we want to inform evidence-based policy design. Now, as I said earlier on, the adaptation plan was first established in 2011, yeah? And it has existed for a period of about 10 years now. And the government is actually thinking of revising this adaptation plan. Prior to the government formulating a new plan, the question then is, what has happened to the existing plan? Has the existing plan been able to achieve its expected goal? And I said earlier, one of these expected goals of the old plan was to reduce the vulnerabilities specifically for women and children in the agricultural sector in Nigeria. So one of the expected contributions here is how do we now use the findings of this study to feed into the new plan that is going to be developed. And in one of our, in our proposal, we intend to have these regular joint sittings between policymakers and researchers. So our dissemination strategy is going to involve roundtable discussions, seminars, and workshops with the policy relevant people, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture, the National Assembly committees with respect to environment, ecology, and climate change. We want to, prior to the establishment of a new plan, we want to use our finding of what works, why did it work, and the general perception of how adaptation strategies can reduce vulnerabilities and feed that into the new design that is expected to be established. Thank you for this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Emeka. You are even 1 minute early. I don't know if you want to say any final thoughts, but thanks a lot for the presentation. Now I'm going to turn to our jury members for questions first. If jury members can switch, can turn on the video again. Then we can go around if there are questions. In fact, who would like to go? Okay, Habib, yes.
Yes, thank you, Emeka, for your presentation. I'm just wondering. First of all, I'm a sociologist, and I take a much broader view of multidimensional poverty. Now, the way you presented and what you want to do, from my point of view, that you can understand whether poverty, multi-level poverty in Nigeria is increasing or decreasing. All the indicators are fine, but how can we be sure that it's all because of adaptability? Just think of a situation that in one region, in one village, you have another program. The program addresses to the reduction of health vulnerability. So that would have some impact on the health statistics, which is one element, one dimension of the multidimensional poverty indicator or index. And there could be several of such interventions, not only from government, but from NGOs, from local, international. Unless one adopts something like randomized controlled trial, how could you isolate the impact of all the other variables that might be there, and we are either ignoring it or downplaying it and simply focusing on one particular impact or one particular variable, which is adaptation, variable adaptation, as understood in the local government documents and so on. So how do you react to that?
So I propose we collect a few. Wait 1 second. I just wanted to ask Jane and Dr. Takara whether there were other questions, so we will collect a few questions.
Okay. Thank you. Can I go?
Yes.
I can raise hand chat. Thank you, Emeka, for that very good presentation. Let me pick the question actually from what Akio has asked, because I have something similar. This work, of course, is very important. Issues of multidimensional poverty are very important, and increasingly studies are going beyond income-based poverty measures to multidimensional poverty. My question is actually related to what the previous speaker has said. And I'm looking at your indicators of multidimensional poverty on one side, and then climate change adaptation on the other side. And to me, I believe that your climate change adaptations in this case can only have indirect effects on multidimensional poverty, given the indicators that you have. And I think that's precisely what the previous speaker indirectly is also talking about. Because you see in your indicators that you have there, you have health, education, nutrition. How does adaptation directly affect education, for instance? Okay, perhaps maybe we do some farm practices, we boost our livelihoods, we get some income that we can actually then divert to schooling and so forth. And this is why you find that sometimes, or in most cases, as you're saying, the studies on adaptation will use income measures of poverty, because then you are saying adaptation at the farm level, then will give you some outcome at the farm level, whether it's agricultural increased productivity, whether it's increased profits, whether it's increased incomes, and then how those can translate to the effects on these others. So I would want to hear your thoughts on that. And then, of course, there's a question of if that was even the case, where there could be the kind of the two-way relationship between these and how you'd handle them. For instance, it could be that households that are already multidimensionally poor are too poor actually to get involved in adaptation. Are you taking that into account, or are you just saying that, okay, adaptation can improve the livelihoods? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Takara, please. You're muted.
One is,
okay, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I have a couple of questions. One is about the question of policy implementation. You know, how much do these government policies, adaptation policies, get implemented on the spot, and how does that count? That's the first question. And the second question is about health, because health is one of the key components of our general question that we are posing for this year's competition. Now, how does that feature in the multidimensional poverty that you're going to explore?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Emeka, your floor is yours. You have, of course, a few questions about attribution. How can you make the link between these different dimensions you're considering, about the level of analysis that you need to say anything about the link, and of course about health and whether these policies are actually implemented.
Okay. Thank you very much for the questions. I will start with Dr. Aiko's question first. With respect to health, because health is the theme of this year's awards. In measuring multidimensional poverty, we're going to give different weights to each dimension. So for example, we're going to give health 33% of the weights. We're going to give education 33% of the weight. And we give livelihood 33% of the weight. And you know that from literature that health, education, and livelihood are interlinked. So it's the degree to which we focus more on health depend on the amount of weight we give to health in measuring multidimensional poverty. So it's from that perspective that we're looking at health, and the fact that instead of just looking at poverty from just one dimension, look at it from these perspectives. With respect to also policy implementation, how much of these policies get implemented? From the little interaction I've had with the policy perspective, the adaptation strategies in the plan are implemented on the spot. So for example, the government might decide that, okay, through the Ministry of Health, Environment, or the Ministry of Agriculture. If you want to use crop tolerant, drought tolerant crops, they get these crops and spread within all the regions of the country. So it's not just an adaptation strategy that is done in one specific region, because it's more like a public intervention. So it's done within all the regions and not just localized to specific. I think this is part of the advantage we have in using the data that exists in the GHS, the General Household Survey. So the implementation is done on a general scale and not specific. However, from a time perspective, it is not all done at the same time, but within the range of 2011 to now, some of these adaptation strategies have already occurred. So that's why we said in the study we're going to use different waves over time. For Professor Jane's question, yes, I acknowledge that there might be some endogeneity issues with respect to the variables chosen in our causal relationship, or I've tried to circumvent that by using a GMM approach. The essence of using the GMM approach is that I don't want to have some intrinsic bias in the estimation. Yes, for example, like the example you gave, that there might be families that are even too poor to adapt. So these unobservable variables, we also want to, if possible, look for an instrumental variable that can target those unobservable variables. You know, this is still like a proposal. So when we go deep into the work, we'll highlight what are these unobservable variables. For example, in the estimated model in the model that we want to estimate, we already have community, a variable that captures community idiosyncrasy. For example, in this community, we may have virtually very, very poor people. Whereas in another community, we might have people or farmers who are not so poor. So you see, those farmers who are not so poor might have a higher leverage to adapt. So even the model, our model will account for this community idiosyncrasies. So the model is not a one-fit-all model. The model will recognize different regions. The model will recognize different demographics. The model will also recognize different unique idiosyncrasies that can exist. So it's not just one model that will fit in all our variables. It will be a model to estimate multidimensional poverty and adaptation strategies in the northern part of Nigeria, multidimensional poverty and adaptation strategies in the southeastern part of Nigeria, because of these different demographics. I also recognize that we may not be able to capture all, but we'll try and look for those that are most significant with respect to this relationship. Okay.
1 minute for the last to answer.
Okay, yes. Professor Habibas, yes. I've been toying with this idea also that we might also look for a different model, because after submitting all this, I must confess, I started thinking about the conceptualization of this and realized that it might be difficult to isolate just adaptation strategies. It might also be difficult to conduct RCTs because of the pandemic, but I have not yet conceptualized how to distinctively isolate that. I've also talked about doing a difference in difference with respect to different regions and try to see how we can get that answer. But I cannot 100% say how that challenge can be solved now.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of time for the Q&A. But I think you did try to respond to all three questions. Let's move on to the second finalist, who is DV Prasada. Prasada is a certified expert in climate adaptation finance from the Frankfurt School, holds a PhD in economics from the New South Wales, and an MSc in agricultural economics and international development. His project is titled Balancing a Triple Threat, Diverse Health, Collapse of Fisheries, and the Vulnerability of Livelihoods in the Artisanal Sea Cucumber Fishery in Sri Lanka. Prasada, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you. We cannot hear you. Can you unmute yourself? It will help for the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Just in a hurry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity for the given opportunity, and welcome everybody to this session and for their interest in the work that we're doing. Let me first introduce briefly who I am. I'm Prasada from Municipal Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, and today my presentation is titled "Balancing a Triple Threat in the Artisanal Sea Cucumber Fishery of Sri Lanka." Let me first give you an overall a sort of a guide to the flow of the presentation. I'll first talk about the introduction or the background to the fishery. And then I'll talk a bit about how the context or the focus of our study aligns with the theme of the award this year. And then a brief conceptualization of the problem in order for me to motivate the objectives and the research approach. And then I'll finish off by talking about the policy issues relevant to this particular study as well as the context. So let me start with the background. Sea cucumbers are a class of marine invertebrates found in seabeds, mostly in the tropical seas. This is a multi-species fishery, and the sea cucumbers as a group of animals or group of fishery has a significant ecological function of being bottom feeders. They recycle nutrients, being detrivores. And the reason why sea cucumbers have come to the limelight in terms of the global trade is that the recent expansion of Asia-Pacific markets have led to a large demand on food and medicine from using processed sea cucumbers. In this context, Sri Lanka is one of the 40 to 50 odd countries that export sea cucumbers. And for Sri Lanka, it's a very promising fishery in the sense that on a per animal basis, that right now, this fishery has the largest value addition. And it's the ratios are from a fresh animal to a processed animal, almost like 20 to 1, it's like 1 to 20, so 20 times more. The price is 20 times more compared to a fresh animal. However, promising as it is, the sea cucumber fishery poses a serious development paradox, not just in terms of ecology and economics, but being a dive fishery, there is this element of health that is unattended historically and obviously remains to be so in most artisanal and smallholder settings. And also, given the importance of the fishery from an economic perspective, there is very little in terms of governance, specifically in terms of effort regulation. These are the contextual elements that surrounds the local sea cucumber fishery. And let me just sort of synthesize this broad background into one sentence, which is, if I were to do that, I would say that the high prices that is generated through the export demand would generate perverse incentives leading to exploitation. This broad problem has built in it the tensions between three aspects, which is the health and well-being of the divers, and then the ecosystem health, or the stocks and the ecosystem health. And then there is also the third element, which is the returns. Being a lucrative fishery, there is a lot of attention on it, as well as there is a lot of benefit in terms of foreign exchange. So there is this tension between these, the fishers' welfare, the ecosystem health, and the revenue. So the context has these three tensions, and that kind of motivates my focus today, which is I'm talking about the diver's health as talking about the potential collapse of fish stocks as the environmental aspect, and then I'm talking about the vulnerability of livelihoods as the economic well-being aspects. And I believe that this aligns almost directly onto the award theme for this year. And that's one of the reasons as to why I was thinking of proposing this particular study this year. So let me take each of these three elements, or the three tensions, and build a little bit of detail around them. So the risk to divers' health. when it comes to excess effort in a dive fishery, the direct implication is the divers would dive deeper, stay longer underwater, and then there was rapid ascent in order to start another cycle. There is a lot of medical literature out there which attribute the pressure-related health hazards to compressed air, breathing of compressed air, and the rapid ascent to surface. Most notably, decompression disease has been highlighted, which leads to collapse of lungs, and in the unfortunate case. But even if it does not lead to that eventuality, there are long-term impacts of the diving, pressure-related diving health hazards. This situation is worsened by the fact that in artisanal fisheries, there is insufficient training and suboptimal diving apparatus associated. And in particular, in the context of Sri Lanka, as in several other countries, there is no emergency health support at landing sites for the divers to access, and which amounts to a great concern in terms of the welfare. Then the second, on the environment front, there are two things: collapse of the stocks, which is imminent, and then the ecological imbalance. It's so happened that it's in a very timely manner that the Convention for International Trade in Endangered Species, that is 18th Conference of Parties in 2019, actually listed 5 sea cucumber species as endangered, and giving global recognition to the fact that, or global awareness to the fact that this is an endangered fishery, and the international trade in this has some serious ecological concerns. Apart from this wide recognition, there were other local literature which was citing immature animals in the catch, and smuggling and illegal caging of the animals, and also deterioration of the seabed ecosystem, all of which were aligning with the fact that there is an ecological pressure, ecological cost that will potentially collapse the stocks. Then coming to the third aspect of the economics of it, I'm particularly looking at a couple of things in terms of there is uncertainty due to large number of uncertainties. This is generally true about most of the artisanal fisheries, but especially in the case of a dive fishery, this is the case. And the literature has also highlighted a very significant issue in the context of economics of sea cucumber fishery, which is these huge asymmetries in the value chain. Because of how lucrative they are at the destination export markets and how little the divers are paid, divers are actually the people who take all the risk. So that difference, asymmetry, has been highlighted in the literature, and it's also observed in the local setting. Also, there are these issues of post-disability livelihood options for people who have been exposed to health hazards, but they're making their work life shorter than would otherwise be. So let me just conceptualize these broad tensions into a very simple sort of construct in order for me to motivate the objectives and some of the hypotheses which I included in the proposal. So starting with at the bottom, the fishing effort. What I'm using this is instrumenting fishing effort, or sort of conditional on depth of diving in. So we would associate fishing effort directly with the stocks and the diver health, and also the species composition of the catch. Now, the stocks health and the species composition of the catch would have a direct implications on the income. So in a way, the income and fishing effort is now sort of mediated or connected from this very logical process. And this simplifies my research question a little bit. So even though there are other factors, of course, involved. So with that context of conceptualization, let me go to the objective. In the absence of any work done in terms of health hazards or the exposure to health hazards in this particular fishery in the local context, I intend to establish the prevalence and the degree of exposure as a preliminary thing. And then more importantly, I'm interested in assessing or valuing the incremental cost first of the health, and then second of the ecological pressure, conditional on the depth of the diving depth. Thirdly, I would want to measure the incremental benefit in terms of the income and the income vulnerability, the variation of income, again conditional on depth. So there's depth I'm using as one of the things that sort of identifies the the methodology. Oh, and as an identification mechanism. So let me just briefly talk about the research methodology. It's going to be, it's planned to be a survey of divers, and I'm thinking of 30 landing sites across 3 fishery regions. And one of the unique things that I'm proposing at this point in this study is that I'm trying to stratify the landing sites by the depth to the seabed. In doing so, I can use the natural variation of depth to identify the variation of incremental benefits and incremental cost of fishing effort. This is actually facilitated very well by the natural variation of depth to seabed in the coastal belt of Sri Lanka. It turns out from the bathymetric maps that there is very significant variation from along the coastal belt, which I'm trying to use it as a way of instrumenting the natural variation, as an instrumenting for the incremental costs and benefits. So in terms of health costs, there would be direct and indirect valuation possible based on the enumerated data. And ecological costs would not be that direct, but it will be proxied by different, several proxies are possible, including one would be, a candidate one would be the percentage of immature animals in the catch, again by depth. So it's difficult to have a full holistic view of the ecological aspect without doing some preliminary work on the issue at the field. So the benefits, again, I'm thinking at this point of basically using the market value of the catch based on species composition, again, conditional on depth, because depending on the variation of depth, the species composition would vary to a certain degree, and that we can use as part of our identification. In terms of the methodology, right now I'm proposing this 3-stage structure where I would try to relate the income to, among other things, to diverse health. And diverse health in turn would be a function of the diving depth, among other things. And then the diving depth is going to be a function of the prices of the dominant species in the catch, the ratio of high to low value species, and also the immature animals in the catch, as well as the competition across at the landing site among the divers. This is a preliminary framework that I'm basically proposing in order to show that 3-step connection. Then there are different ways of estimating it, obviously, including the structural equation models or even a simple 3-stage estimation. So the point of doing this is to come up with the partial estimates that will help me to value the trade-offs between the health and income and environment and income conditional on effort. So it's essentially aspires to generate some information about the relative the contribution of these factors to each other in order to build an information on this overall context. So in the innovativeness and originality, and to the best of my knowledge, there has been little quantitative work of this nature done for this particular fishery in general, in linking the health and the environment to the economics of the fishery. And then one of the things that I feel is unique, that given that I'm using these bathymetric maps in order to use the natural variation of depth to the seabed as a way of identifying these differences in costs and benefits, which would ultimately help me to visualize the trade-offs between environment, health, and the economic or the returns of the fishery. So with that, let me just move into the few policy aspects that are quite relevant to this scope and the focus of our study. Thank you. So one is the big issue is the returns that compensate for health risks. So the returns do not compensate for the health risks of diving right now. And then we have to, there are a lot of relevance on trying to think of returns that compensate for the health risks. And again, related to that, on the left side of the panel, there are standard risk smoothing mechanisms like insurance that should come in. And right now there is nothing because of the uncertainty as well as the risk that has been in this fishery. And also important to the sustainability of this fishery is the fact that the value chain should take into account or integrate the conservation motive, the conservation incentives in a big way in order for this fishery to become sustainable. And then finally, I think there is a need to think of what in terms of the open access extraction such as aquaculture, which would help the sustainability of the fishery also. That's all I wanted to. That's all what I wanted to discuss. Sorry if I did jump a little ahead of beyond time limit. So over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Prasada. Let me just turn. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Let me just turn to the jury to see if there are questions. Professor Conker.
Yeah. Can I just quickly ask two interrelated questions? Question one, in Sri Lanka, if you look at the workers who you would call vulnerable, in that vulnerability scale, where do deep diver, fishers stand? The related question is, how many people are we talking about in terms of number? Because I mean, it's an interesting project, but I'm interested in terms of impact, that are we going to able to solve the problem of poverty of a large number of people or a very specific groups of people, even though they seem to be vulnerable and they have a big challenge. Related question is, globally, if we look at it, and given the geological differences and not to mention the political economic differences, how relevant the findings of your research would be to address this problem globally, to benefit or to address the question of poverty and poverty, ecology, health, relationship nexus to a larger audience at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Conker. Dr. Takara or Professor Mariara? Dr. Takara.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is, how would you measure the impact on the environment? Is there a way to concretely calculate the decrease in the stock of sea cucumbers? And secondly, about policy implication, isn't there a need to talk about the demand side, as it were? If you really wanted to change things, what about the buyer's demands? So isn't there a need to go international, to involve the market side people to really change things?
Thank you. Professor Mariara, yes. Please unmute.
Okay, thank you. You can now hear me.
Yes.
Yes, so very interesting work. I actually liked it very much. Just to add on to what my colleagues have asked, maybe I'll pick on the issue of policy and applications, the practical applications. Because I think one of the things I'm missing, not just in this proposal, but also the others, is maybe the plans for actual stakeholder engagement, especially the policymakers. For instance, this proposal talks about tangible inputs, outputs such as policy briefs. But my question is, if we really want to do a study like this, which can actually be very rich in terms of policy implications, should we not have or consider some practical applications of the work? For instance, in policy and interventional design in the area of study, and maybe think about scaling it up to other regions and also internationally, as mentioned by my colleagues. And I think for us to do this, it will be very important if these studies could actually consider what we call co-production of knowledge, so that then the research teams can work together with someone from the government, some government partner, who can ensure that from the beginning, you focus on the right policy question, and you are targeting maybe the right government stakeholder who can then ensure that this interesting work, if you actually carry it out, you do not just leave it at that level, but it can actually have impact on policy at the local level, maybe at a bigger scale in the country and also internationally. I had also a question on the methods, though I think perhaps the challenge is that we are limited on space to write out the proposal. So it's not exactly clear how the authors have actually arrived at the three equations that they are talking about. I know they have mentioned a bit maybe about the uniqueness of each of the equations, but maybe the proposal should have documented better how identification issues are going to be addressed in the at the, can I say, at the correct time when the work is actually being implemented. Thank you.
Thank you all. Prasanda, you have about 4 minutes to reply.
Okay, so let me be quick about it. So first questions about the first set of questions about the impact of this fishery. So the numbers, as far as I know, based on some of the fieldwork I've done, is the community of these people is maximum around 10,000. So it's not like a very large number of people, and because dive fisheries are not anywhere, is not like in huge numbers. So this, but the relative importance of the fisheries in terms of how much money it makes, and how many livelihoods are supported by it, because it's not just the divers, because there's a processing industry which is also because these animals, the sea cucumbers, fetch 20 times more in terms of price when it's processed, and it's actually processed on site or around. And there are a lot of big private players also getting involved now because of the lucrativeness of the business and the margins out there. So, so in terms of how it generalizes to, in fact, the Sri Lankan experience, again, still on the same first set of questions, the Sri Lankan experience is quite parallel to some of the small island experiences in say the Pacific island countries, where things are under similar scale with similar importance to the local economics. So that's, I think I've sort of quickly answered that set of questions. I'm happy to give second set of questions about from Akio, is about how do I see the stock, what are the indicators of stock impact or the environmental impact. Now, what I'm proposing to use is the species composition in the catch, because it's a multi-species fishery, and I said endangered species are several of them. There are 5 of endangered species, but usually the species like 15 species kind of fishery locally in Sri Lanka, and then the species composition helps me to sort of proxy for the ecological impact, because the catch changes, but the dominant species or the ratio of different species changes from site to site, from effort, the levels of effort, so conditional. And also the fact that there are immature animals in the catch, because there is a standard size that is recognized as maturity based on the marine ecology of it, so that it's very easily noticeable whether immature animals are there in the catch. The point of immature animals would be that they have not reached the breeding stage, in which case you extracting them really jeopardizes the replenishment of the wild stock. Right now, it's a wild stock extraction going on. Demand side, yes, I think the driver of this particular fishery, but then there is very little handle locally on this issue, because the final exporting is done by large companies. They basically collect the material and export to these destinations. So it definitely is part of the story, but it's difficult to handle it. So let me jump into the last set of questions, if I can. Yeah, I agree with the fact that my policy implications or policy engagements are quite limited as of now, but there are a lot of ways in which government can partner this. But the problem I had is right now the government doesn't have like a significant footing on this industry, and is driven by several large private actors at the exports level. So there is an awareness to be built on the government to be on board on this issue in order for it to be of relevance as a broader policy issue out there. But there is knowledge of it, given that this fishery is really high value. but it's in the sort of in the making.
Thank
Over
you
to you.
very much, and sorry for taking the time, but we need to make sure that every panelist has the same time to answer questions. So
I understand.
We're running a little bit late. So let's jump. Thank you very much, Prasanda. Let's jump to our third presentation, our third finalist, who is Coxin Won. So Vincent has a doctorate as well as extensive academic and industrial experience in life cycle assessment and green policy development. Among other things, he also played some role in the UN Conference of Parties in Marrakesh, where he gave a keynote speech. Vincent's project is titled Development of a Multi-Objective Life Cycle Eco-Efficiency Optimization Model, Formulating a Sustainable Municipal Solid Waste Management Policy Framework. The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you, Francesco, for your kind introduction. Good day, distinguished jury and everyone. My name is Vincent. So today I'm glad to share my proposal to all of you. The title of my proposal is a bit long, but to make it simple, we are going to develop a life cycle optimization model. So hopefully that using this model, we are able to identify the optimal waste treatment solution when designing a sustainable municipal solid waste management policy framework. So first of all, let me introduce my team. I'm Vincent, currently working as an assistant professor at Salmon University, Malaysia, and my core researcher for this research is Dr. Liu, currently work as a senior lecturer at Malaysia-Japan International Institute of Technology. So here is the outline of my presentation. First of all, I will start with a research background, followed by implication, policy implication, then methodology, and lastly, way forward of this proposal. So let's look at the first part, research background. Well, solid waste management is a universal issue affecting every single person all over the world. According to the World Bank, the global solid waste production reached 2 billion tons in 2016 and expected to increase to 3.4 billion tons by 2050. Well, trading solid waste can be expensive. It can account as high as 20% of the municipal budget for low-income countries. And because of that, solid waste crisis has caused an increasing burden to the global cities, especially in developing countries. And there's no exception in Malaysia. Well, in Malaysia, around 60% of our solid waste consists of municipal solid waste. And every day, we throw away around 38,000 tons of municipal solid waste, in which more than 80% of the waste are dumped in landfills. This is very sad to say that out of 157 operational landfills, only 24 are sanitary. In other words, most of our landfills are open landfills with no proper treatment system. In average, Malaysians throw away a higher amount of solid waste per capita per day as compared to the worldwide average of 0.74. So what are the consequences of disposing the municipal solid waste at open landfills? Well, first of all, if you spread disease by different vectors such as birds, insects, rodents, it will also generate greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane gas, as well as the other air pollutants. It will contaminate the soil and the groundwater, mainly due to the dirty water generation, in which in the end, it will lead to public health concerns. And inside the municipal solid waste itself, it consists of a lot of precious materials. For example, the metals, the glass, the bottles, the papers. So if we just throw away all this waste at open landfills, in the end, it will create economic inefficiency. Therefore, current municipal solid waste management practice in Malaysia is unsustainable. It has caused public health concerns, environmental pressure, and economic inefficiency. Meanwhile, Malaysia government is always looking for solutions in order to achieve some of our national policy target. These include to reduce the carbon intensity emission to 45% by 2030, based on 2005 levels, to increase the solid waste recycling rate to 40% by 2025, and to increase the renewable energy target to 20% by 2025. However, in solid waste sector, the government always finds a huge challenge to achieve all these mentioned targets, mainly due to a lack of scientific evaluation of existing as well as new proposed municipal solid waste facilities in Malaysia. And due to these circumstances, there's an urgent need for us to evaluate the environmental and economic impacts of different municipal solid waste facilities. To do so, we can apply life cycle eco-efficiency model, which include life cycle assessment, LCA, and life cycle costing, LCC. Through the use of LCA and LCC, we can evaluate the environmental impacts together with the human health impacts, as well as the economic aspect of a particular waste facility from a life cycle perspective. However, I would like to emphasize that municipal solid waste is a complex mixture with high variations of compositions such as food waste, glass, papers, bottles, as well as electronic waste. For each and every waste over here, they have their own characteristics. Therefore, there's no single dominating waste facility that can allow us to treat all waste in one go and can be applied for every country. In fact, we need to find a combination of waste facilities that can allow us to treat different types of waste to different valuable resources, such as livestock feed, compost, heat and electricity, based on the local environmental conditions and policy need. But we need to know that the conventional life cycle eco-efficiency model can only help us to find the relative impact for each and every municipal solid waste facility, but cannot help us to identify the optimum solution when we combine all these waste together. Because of this problem, the policymakers always have a hard time to argue for the choices made and face difficulties when they want to find an integrated optimal life cycle environmental and economic waste treatment solution when designing a sustainable municipal solid waste management. And because of these limitations, it comes to the objective of our study. Well, in our study, we aim to create a simple and deterministic multi-objective life cycle eco-efficiency optimization model in order to investigate the optimal MSW or management solution based on local environmental conditions, policy need, and national targets in Malaysia. We hope that through the development of this optimization model, it will serve as a new approach which will provide some new insights to the methodological aspect for those researchers who are working in LCA, LCC, and optimization. After getting the results from the optimization model, we also aim to formulate new recommendations for the municipal solid waste management policy framework. As I said before, right now in Malaysia, there's no in-depth life cycle environmental and economic evaluations of different municipal solid waste facilities. And therefore, there's no data-driven insight when we want to formulate the municipal solid waste policy. Hopefully, through these new recommendations in this study, it can provide a paradigm shift on how we manage and how the municipal solid waste being carried out at the policy level in Malaysia. And in the end, to create a green, resource-efficient economy and ensure a greater quality of life for the Malaysian society. Well, in terms of policy implication, from local agenda, this research strongly links to 11th Malaysian Plan, SW Corp Strategic Plan, as well as national renewable energy policies. So under these plans and policies, we emphasize on the adoptions of sustainable consumption and production patterns, the use of appropriate solid waste facilities, as well as to encourage non-solar renewable energy projects, for example, the bioenergies from the landfill gas, in order to achieve our renewable energy mix target. Hopefully, the outcome of this study will provide an additional view to the implementations of all these plans and policies. From global agenda, this research also coincides with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is to ensure responsible consumption and production patterns. We believe that our study will have an impact specifically on SDG 12.4, which is to achieve environmentally sound management of waste throughout the life cycle. We also believe that our study will help to strategize the upcoming 2021 to 2025 12 Malaysian Plan, in which SDG 12 has been captured as one of the important criteria under this plan. And lastly, hopefully through the development of this new optimization model, it can be applied to other countries or regions that are currently facing the municipal solid waste crisis, and we can achieve this SDG 12 goal together. For methodology, we design a strategic methodological framework in order to achieve the objective of this research. So under this framework, it consists of 3 main steps. After defining the goal and scope of this study, the first step is to conduct life cycle assessment study. The second step is to conduct life cycle costing study. And after getting the results of LCA and LCC, we are going to integrate into the development of this multi-objective life cycle eco-efficiency optimization model. And after getting the results, we are going to perform data uncertainty and sensitivity analysis in order to enhance the results reliability. And lastly, we are going to provide new recommendations for the policy framework development. So let's look at these 3 steps one by one. So in step 1, we are going to identify the environmental impacts of different municipal solid waste facility using life cycle assessment methodology. We are going to follow the ISO standard, which consists of these 4 main phases. Over here, I would like to emphasize on phase number 3, which is impact assessment. Under this phase, we are going to investigate different impact categories, which include human health, such as climate change, human carcinogenicity, respiratory effect, together with ecosystem, as well as resources. In step 2, we are going to determine the costing impact of the municipal solid waste facility using life cycle costing methodology. So over here, the first step is to define the goal and scope, which is supposed to be in line with step 1. Then we are going to collect the cost data, categorize them accordingly, and use appropriate cost estimating methodologies, such as cost-benefit ratio analysis, payback period, in order to analyze and interpret our cost data. And in step 3, we are going to develop the multi-objective life cycle eco-efficiency optimization model. Well, here shows you the flow diagram on how to develop this model. We start with problem statement. Then we are going to construct the superstructure. Well, the superstructure will be actually an illustration to inform you, to show you the complex interaction between different types of waste, different waste facilities, as well as different valuable resources. And using the results of the LCA and LCC, we are going to integrate into the development of this optimization model. And in this model, we are going to minimize the total cost, and at the same time, to minimize the total environmental emission with the inclusions of the human health impact. Well, we understand that data collection and accuracy will be one of the major risks in this study. So in order to minimize the research risk, first, we are going to adopt some of the existing data from our previous project, and we are going to conduct site surveys in order to collect additional primary data. And after getting all this data, we are going to perform data gap analysis in order to identify is there any missing, obsolete, or unreliable data. And after getting the results, we are going to conduct the uncertainty and sensitivity analysis. This could be done using Monte Carlo simulation, as well as parametric sensitivity analysis. Well, we hope that by doing so, it can enhance the data accuracy and results reliability. And lastly, hopefully it can provide a better understanding about the uncertainties in our input parameters and let us know which parameter will provide a greater impact, and we shall pay more attention on those data. Well, lastly, way forward of this proposal. Well, we believe that this research will achieve the theme of this year, which is unpacking the health, environment, and economic well-being nexus with a main focus on solid waste management. Hopefully, through the development of this optimization model, it can provide a comprehensive optimal life cycle environmental and economic solution when we try to design a sustainable municipal solid waste policy framework. And having this framework, it can provide a better public health quality, circularity waste strategy, and resource efficient when we start to manage our municipal solid waste in Malaysia. But lastly, I would like to end my presentation with a quote given by Annie Leonard, the Executive Director of Greenpeace USA. She said that there's no such thing as a way. When we throw anything away, it must go somewhere. So always remember that waste is not a waste if we send it to a correct place and give it a second life. That's all my presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent, particularly for finishing right on time. Let me turn to the jury then for questions. Who would like to start? Who has a question?
I just kept silent because I wanted to give my colleagues a chance, not to be too pushy. No, I just have this question. I'm quite impressed, and I'm quite convinced that this is a model that you are developing would be applicable not just to Malaysia, but to a large number of countries where urbanization is reckless. And this is the future that we are into, reckless urbanization, unplanned urbanization. So I can see a lot of value of this model. What I'm concerned with is why not enough attention is being placed on recycling? Because many of the things that we throw in waste, as you said, are extremely useful. Metals, glass, plastics, what are we going to do? And is there any model where we could fit in our ability to recycle and how to promote this sort of recycling, in addition to reduction of consumption? So would you address that issue at some point, please?
Thank you, Professor Conker. I think both Dr. Takara and Professor Mariara. Dr. Takara, you go first. You had your hand raised at the beginning.
Okay. Thanks so much for a very clear and logical presentation. As a complete layman to the question, though, I'm trying to build this image of your model, the optimization model. So is it something that you collect all the data, throw them in this model, and what's coming out of it? Is it a concrete policy proposal? What type of measures should be taken to deal with this waste? Or I wasn't very clear about that. Can you clarify on that point, please?
Thank you. And Professor Mariara?
Thank you, Won. A very interesting presentation, very clear. Just to pick up from what my colleagues have asked, the first one is about actuary stew. The issue I raised with the second presentation is as the first speaker, Habibur, mentioned, this work has a very wide applicability. To me, I was looking at it like it would be applicable to the local context, maybe your regional context, not just Malaysia, but the regional, and also at the international level. I think that has been mentioned, and you've also said so in the work. But again, my question is the starting point. And maybe this links up with the with what the last speaker has also asked. You need to work with the local stakeholders, the way I see it, the local policy makers, and then how then do you work with them in a way that they can understand your modeling? Because one of the problems why we have we do not have a cross link between research and policy is because sometimes policymakers distrust the researchers because they think that we are very complex. Of course, the life cycle optimization model you have is quite complicated, and I'm sure not very many people in this room would perhaps relate to it. So I imagine that, again, if you're working with policymakers, that's a place they would get lost. But I think given your experience from looking at what you have done, you should be able to work with the local stakeholders, not just the policymakers, policymakers, but local stakeholders, could be institutions that are dealing with solid waste disposal, could be municipalities, but then you must be able to develop some package of the work or of the proposal that you can actually work with them in a way that they would understand your model and how it fits into solving the problem at hand. I do not think that would be hard, but I think the point I'm making is, as area, you don't want to do this very beautiful work and then it doesn't have the application, because really it has a lot of potential application and you have narrated it very well. But the minute you are connect with your core researcher without involving the other stakeholders, then in the end, it will be very hard for you to sell it to them. Thank you, Chair. And I really enjoyed reading the work and also listening to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. We have one additional question from the audience, which is about the notion of optimal. Yeah, how do you calculate optimal when you're looking at environment, economy, and health in the context of your work? You have 5 minutes to respond. I know it's a lot of content, but bear with me.
Thank you very much for all the questions and comments. I think I start with Professor Conker. Definitely, I do agree with you. Recycling, when we talk about waste separation, is very important when we talk about in terms of solid waste management. For example, in Malaysia, we just only achieve around 10 to 20%. I mean, when we talk about recycling. So without a very good recycling system, it's also very hard, I mean, for us to identify different types of waste facility. I mean, it's no use, I would say that. But what actually my model actually can suit to this recycling problem is that we can actually do a few scenario analysis. Like, for example, right now, we can look into the base case scenario. We have 20% of recycling rate. So given this 20% of recycling rate, how are we going to divert all these waste to different municipal solid waste facility in order to optimize the cost, supposed to be minimize the total cost, and as well as minimize the environmental and as well as the health impact. And how about in future? We can try to do some scenario analysis, like what if we increase to 30%, 40%, 50%, and even we talk about some of the developed countries like Germany, South Korea, that can achieve like around 60% on that. So if we make it like to 60%, how should the waste to be diverted? So hopefully at the end of this study, the outcomes actually will provide some suggestions to the governments or policymakers to let them know that if we are able to achieve these kinds of recycling rate, so how should all this waste being diverted, in which it actually will give you an optimum solution. Well, the second question from Professor Takahara, you asked regarding like what is the outcomes of the model. Well, when we talk about this optimization model, it doesn't really give you just only one answer. What we actually call is a Pareto solutions. A Pareto solutions means that a series of answers that actually will tailor-make or suit to your requirement. Perhaps the policymakers that wants to have a very high impacts in terms of the minimizations of cost. But we also understand that we need to strike a balance, a trade-off in between environment, economic, and as well as human health. So the optimization model in the end, it will give you a set of Pareto solutions, and having these solutions, it actually will suggest you which recommendations that actually will suit to your overall requirement. And at the end of that, what actually I would like to integrate this study into the policymaking process is to developing a framework, a holistic and comprehensive framework that actually will inform the policymakers. If we are going to treat all these type of waste, how should we select all these municipal solid waste facility? In the end, it actually will give you the optimum solutions based on environmental health and as well as the economic impact. So the third question from Professor Mariana, I do agree with you. If you talk about research and policy, we always very hard to find a gap or bridge the gap in between these two. Sometimes the government sectors, people that actually will find that our research is too complicated and how does it translate to the language? So what actually I'm planning to do after the outcomes of this research, in terms of applications, I would say that mainly to develop a policy framework, a framework that actually will inform the government people or even the society. If we really just only have all these constraints, the budget, the limited financial resources, and based on the local environmental conditions, so how should we do the treatment of all these waste? And of course, after having this kind of optimization model, we can actually apply to other countries as well by getting their waste data, compositions, their constraint, their policy need. So this is how actually we can do the integration in between research and as well as policy. So the last question from the audience, which is how am I going to integrate the optimal solutions into these three aspects: environmental, health, and economic? As I say, for this study, first of all, we are going to investigate the life cycle assessment, mainly to include the environmental and as well as the human health impact. So first of all, we are able to identify the environmental impact and human health impact for each and every individual facility. However, we know that there's no single dominating waste facility that can help us to track all waste. So that's the reasons to integrate all those life cycle data into our optimization model. And using this optimization model, we are going to look as a whole, as a holistic. When we try to integrate all these three aspects together, how are we going to get an optimum solution for our solid waste treatment facilities?
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. It's too bad. Next year, maybe we should double the time for questions and answers, I think, because there's so much interesting things to say. If I had a chance to ask you a question, I was actually asked about the role of the informal sector in all the recycling and solid waste management as a key stakeholder, which might not fit into obviously a very clean scheme. But I think we've reached the end of the public session and of the presentation. The jury will now convene and decide on the ranking, on the assignment of the awards to the finalists. We of course will be soon announcing in the next days the results. So please stay tuned and follow our GDN, our social media to know who actually was awarded a prize. I would like to thank again the finalists very much for the presentation and for the time it took to prepare them last week, along with our comms team and my colleague Joao, the jury, of course, for being part of this session, and of course the audience as well. This has been a very stimulating session. We look forward to the deliberations of the jury next. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day, and very warm wishes for a very good winter break in the next weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.